Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 11th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Lisa Murkowski in the state of Alaska and President Trump and the Republican Party's determination to oust her as the incumbent senator, as the only Republican who voted to convict him that is up in 2022. This is the first time the GOP will have an opportunity to get rid of one of their own. 7 senators voted to convict President Trump, but a few of them have already been reelected back in 2020 or 2018, so Lisa Murkowski comes down as the easy target. Not only has she voted to convict President Trump, but she has also voted against him an overwhelming portion of his entire term. If you look at the voting record in the state of Alaska for Lisa Murkowski, you'll see that just 72.6% of the time she voted with President Trump's position, which means 1 out of every 4 votes she voted against him. They also have a predicted score based off of the voting record of the state in terms of how partisan it was for President Trump back in 2016. And based off that, the predicted score shows that they expect Lisa Murkowski to vote with President Trump's positions 74.5% of the time. So not only is she not going above and beyond like every other Republican in the Senate, she is going well below compared to her other colleagues. If you put her on the entire scale and sort by voting for Trump's score, you'll notice that as you start to get down to Lisa Murkowski's numbers, you start to reach Heidi Heitkamp levels, Joe Donnelly levels, Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema levels. 72.6% only ranks her above 2 Republicans in office currently, one of them being Rand Paul, which some people might find to be quite interesting, and then Susan Collins, someone who is largely known in the state of Maine as a bipartisan senator, has been reelected by large amounts over the past couple of decades. So Lisa Murkowski being around that area wouldn't necessarily be too far from what we expect, but it shows you in comparison to the rest of the over 50 Republicans in the Senate that have served throughout President Trump's term, she is well below them by considerable amounts. So this is why President Trump really doesn't like Lisa Murkowski. The conviction vote, the unwillingness to move forward with an opposition towards the electoral certification of certain states, and some of these statements he's sent out, even recently on June 7th was his last statement about Lisa Murkowski. He is committed to visiting the state of Alaska and will be campaigning against her. Now, the interesting thing about that as well is the fact no president or presidential candidate has campaigned in Alaska in decades. I mean, you've seen Sarah Palin as a vice presidential contender, someone who really valued her home state as the governor of the state of Alaska. But beyond that, we never really saw much national attention towards the state. And it made sense. Alaska has long been a safe state for the GOP. From the beginning of the year 2000, at the beginning of the century, Alaska went to George W. Bush by 31 percentage points. I mean, Alaska was comparable to Wyoming, comparable to South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. Some of these margins, this 31-point margin, puts it well above a number of other states, above Oklahoma, above Kansas, above Kentucky, above Indiana. I mentioned all of those states because Alaska all voted to the left of those states in the 2020 election, including South Carolina. So as we go through the years, you will see exactly why now it is starting to be viewed as a race that is competitive. In 2020, if you watched my videos, you'll know Dr. Al Gross, was in a position where he seemed to be competitive in the state of Alaska against the incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. And for 2022, it's not competitive because Democrats can win there, but rather because they have a new voting system, which I will mention in just a moment, and because the state has continued to move further towards the left. So, beginning in the 21st century, a 31-point margin of victory for George W. Bush, absolutely outstanding. 2004, it narrows down to just 26 points, and that's a pretty good amount, but keep in mind that George W. Bush won more votes in 2004 than he did in 2000. A 26-point victory for George W. Bush. Fast forward to 2008, you have Sarah Palin on the ticket. The state holds in the 20s, a 22-point margin of victory for John McCain. 2012, Mitt Romney, it narrows down from 22 points down to 14 points, but still a considerable victory for the GOP. 2016 rolls around, it becomes a 15-point margin of victory, so increases relative to Mitt Romney, and then 2020, where Alaska comes down to a 10.1 margin of victory for the GOP. 10.1% across the state. It is interesting. Alaska has become a state that is closer Then Colorado. Alaska is just as close, and closer actually, than New Mexico. Just as close as Virginia. Alaska can be compared to all three of them. How fascinating that Alaska has come so close after being so far away 20 years ago. So looking at Alaska, the Democratic Party might view 2022 as potentially an opportunity if Trump is trying to separate the GOP until ballot measure 2 passed in the 2020 presidential election. What was that? Well, essentially in Alaska, with Joe Biden getting 43% of the vote, the best performing Democrat in the entirety of the 21st century in Alaska, on that same ballot was ballot measure 2, where they asked the voters 2 questions. They asked, should these people donating more than $2,000 to a campaign, should they have to disclose the sources of their contributions? And ranked choice voting would be established in general elections. Ballot measure 1 failed, but ballot measure 2 passed narrowly. You're talking about one of the closest ballot measures during the entire election season of 2020. So what does ranked choice voting mean? What does ranked choice voting do for the state of Alaska? Well, it's been implemented in the state of Maine, but we haven't actually seen it, go full force in terms of going against what the plurality candidate would have been. Well, let me break it down for you. Taking a look at the preliminary election data in the state of Alaska, you can see here that the general election polling might sort of tell you that, hold on a second, we're looking at ranked choice voting. In this instance, you are looking at the numbers being completely spread out in the beginning. The first round, this primary election. First of all, there are no, primary types of elections. The way that this is going to occur is essentially everybody can run. Everybody will be allowed to be on the same ballot. Democrat, Republican, Independent, Alaska Independents. All of them will be there together to vote on one ballot. But the thing is, the way that ranked choice voting works is it allows people to rank their candidates. So if you're in a situation where you're a Democrat and you want Al Gross as the Democratic nominee to be your first choice, well, let's say he gets, disregard the polling data. Maybe he's an independent, right? And let's take that, first poll that we've seen from March 29th, 2021. You're looking at Al Gross getting 18% of the vote. Lisa Murkowski at 19%, and then Kelly, I believe, Tshibaka at 34%. Well, or is it Shibaka? I'm not entirely sure, but looking at the numbers here, how it would break down. Essentially, Al Gross would be eliminated along with John Howe. He is the Alaska Independence Party, and he's getting 6% of the vote. So the first round would eliminate him, and then it would eliminate Al Gross. But because they are being eliminated, and you rank that person first, you now go to your second option. So you're with Al Gross, and you're saying, I want him to be my first choice. But if he's eliminated, you have a second choice. So your second choice could be between Murkowski and Shibaka. Well, if you know Murkowski is going to side with the Democratic Party more than her opponent, and you're a Democrat, you're going to choose Murkowski. So in that situation, you're saying, okay, Al Gross didn't make it, but now I want Murkowski to make it. Instead of having that idea of being a spoiler or your vote being wasted, you now get to vote in a sense, for every single one of these candidates, but you get to rank them in terms of how much you actually like them. And how would this actually work in a practical sense? Well, let's take a look. So what I did was I took the first poll. Because honestly, I don't think the Democratic Party is going to run a notable candidate. Democrats don't have a strong history in these elections with Lisa Murkowski. In 2016, when she was reelected, the Democrat got 11.6% of the vote. In 2010, when she was also reelected as a write-in candidate, I mean, you're talking about someone who is an electoral juggernaut and the queen of winning in a plurality. She is, getting a lot of the support from Democratic voters. Joe Miller was the more conservative Republican. Scott McAdams, as the Democratic nominee, only received 24% of the vote. And if you even want to go back to 2004, you'll see here that Lisa Murkowski still beat a Democrat. So no matter what you're looking at, no matter which situation you're in, Lisa Murkowski defeats the Democrats and they still don't reach their maximum potential in these elections for whatever reason. And I expect 2022 to be no different. Because Lisa Murkowski is that one Republican in the United States Senate that seems to be going against President Trump consistently, besides Susan Collins, at least on many notable votes. You always hear about Murkowski meeting with Biden, Collins meeting with Biden, Romney meeting with Biden. Just these few senators, and looking at the conviction vote, you see exactly why Alaska might be a state where Democrats would be more comfortable with Murkowski in than trying to run their own candidate in 2022. Because of ranked choice voting, we're going to do a situation where the Democrats do run a candidate. I chose the second poll because it allowed Lisa Murkowski to move on, and we're talking about a scenario in which she wins. And I also took the 21% of undecided voters, and I split them up based off the 2020 election results, how many of the undecided voters split for President Trump versus Joe Biden, and then I took the amount of Democratic support in recent elections. It was a whole, method that I had to go through, but essentially, I came down to these numbers where Lisa Murkowski was at 27% as a Republican, Kelly Tshibaka at 39% as a Republican, John Howe as the Alaskan Independence Party nominee at 10%, Al Gross as 23% running as a Democrat/independent, really wouldn't make a difference, and then Hunky Lee as an independent running with 1%. So since there are no formal party nominations, all of these people can be on the ballot, but they will soon be eliminated. So in the first round, one person completely, underperforms the rest, and that's Hunky Lee as the independent. So he's eliminated out of this. So we move on, and that 1% goes to the next person that they ranked. Since it's just 1%, really didn't make a difference. It went to Al Gross. Now we're in round 2, where you have the candidates, still around an even split, but Josh Howe seems to be the one who's doing significantly worse at just 10% of support. So as the Alaskan Independence Party nominee, he's eliminated. You take that 10% and you disperse it based off the way that these voters have voted in the past, typically leaning towards the conservatives. And so I only gave around, I believe a fifth of the vote towards the Democrats and broke it up amongst the Republicans evenly. And then in round 3, Al Gross as the Democrat/independent gets eliminated. Lisa Murkowski is 4 percentage points above him, but Kelly Tshibaka at 44%. Seems like she's on a pathway to victory, right? But since you are eliminating the Democrats, since you are taking him out of the scenario, probably around 90% of those Democratic voters would be much happier with Murkowski than any other type of Republican. Keep in mind, Lisa Murkowski wins this election because you're taking away Al Gross and you're giving her 90% of that vote. And you might be thinking, why wouldn't the traditional Trump Republican win? Because Lisa Murkowski is still running as a Republican. She will still have that residual support. There are still anti-Trump Republicans out there. And since she will be getting 90%, possibly more, of the Democratic vote, she will likely be on an easy pathway to be reelected. She started out in round 1 with just 27% of the vote, but because of ranked choice voting, if this was a regular election, the polling means, she would be screwed. If this was a regular election, Lisa Murkowski would not make it through. But because of ranked choice voting, it could not have come at a more convenient time for her because it allows Democrats to express interest for her without having to vote against the Democrat in round number 1. And if round number 1 doesn't even occur with the Democrat, you can expect Lisa Murkowski to start out with 44% of the vote, 37% of the vote, and then would require just a simple portion of the remaining electorate in order to win. The thing about Kelly Tshibaka is that she is a Republican who is running solely to oppose Lisa Murkowski. It's not an open race. This is not a race that is supposed to be primaried. When you have an incumbent, you typically want them to win. But because of her outspokenness towards President Trump, her voting record of voting against the Republican Party's interests 1/4 of the time, they are now fielding and looking for the right person to run against her. But she still has a lot of that support from Democrats, independents, and other Republicans. Democrats, as you can see in the 2020 election, didn't necessarily have too bad of an electoral performance. The best performing Democrat in the entirety of the 21st century reduced the margin down from what was 31% down to just 10 points. And not to try to insinuate that Alaska is going blue, but rather there are more Democratic voters, and Democratic voters overwhelmingly will choose Lisa Murkowski over any other Republican. So when President Trump comes out to Alaska and starts to campaign against her, that will only encourage Democrats to rank her higher. When President Trump continues to send out more and more statements about Lisa Murkowski, the Democratic Party is going to do everything they can to ensure that more of these statements do come out. That Donald Trump is that one Republican polarizing figure that is completely going against Lisa Murkowski, and since there aren't partisan primaries, this will only benefit Lisa Murkowski. The more and more that President Trump criticizes her and calls her a rhino and says that she is not a representative of the modern Republican Party, that will only make Democrats more inclined to choose her. So in fact, she might win 95% of the vote from the Democrats. Maybe, 97%. I know it seems unrealistic, but these Democratic voters are not choosing Dr. Al Gross simply because they don't, want any Republican. They'd be much happier and would prefer one over the other. There's a reason why Lisa Murkowski tops all of the other Senate Republicans in her home state relative to all the other senators' home states in terms of approval amongst Democrats. She may not be adored or loved or may not be captivating their interest, but she certainly is making a name for herself and allowing her to be in a position where she can pretty much say and do whatever she wants in opposition to the modern GOP, and because she has that residual support, that never Trump, anti-Trump Republican support that reluctantly votes for him on the presidential ballot. There's a reason why these down ballot Republicans do better than Donald Trump. She will get their support in addition to almost all of the Democratic support. Lisa Murkowski was saved by ranked choice voting. She was saved, in the wildest extent, because the preliminary data tells us she would not even have made it through a traditional GOP primary. And if it was just a plurality system where everyone was on the ballot, she wouldn't make it there either. The one thing that she might have to worry about is a Democrat locking her out. But I can tell you now, once Democrats start to realize that's a possibility, they're going to try to make them campaign less. They're going to subvert them or make them drop out of the race altogether. Because I can tell you now, Democrats would much rather have Lisa Murkowski than any other type of Trump-backed GOP nominee. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.